Hey guys, so today I'm going to talk about my community. For my project, I chose the city of Cheviot, which is right in between Green Township and White Oak. It was established in 1932. Um, I have lived here for 3 years and I love it. The city is full of older homes, and when I say older, I mean like 100 years. I know that my home part in particular is 111 years old. So a lot of the what we call turn of the century homes are very commonly seen in Cheviot. The city is very small. Only 8,300 people live here, which seems like a lot, but it's not. Um, it has two schools, one church. There used to be two, now there's only one, and a hospital just outside the boundaries that my mom actually works at, and it's probably a couple minutes away outside of the borders. I mean, really not far at all. The strengths of this community include the nearby hospital, the access to community amenities such as the walking trails, the community pool, the community center, and the high prevalence of healthcare. The only reason there is a high prevalence of healthcare in this area is because a lot of the people are unemployed, or they don't meet the, what do you call it, the income threshold. So a lot of them are on like government assistance. So a lot of them do have health care. Although it's free health care, it's not, I guess it's better than not having any at all. But risk factors include addiction, poverty, biological factors, and that all relates to the priority problem, which is mental illness. Um, when I was driving through the city and looking at different things for my windshield survey, I noticed that mental illness, just from interviewing a few people, is very prominent, more so than I thought. And so my goal was to increase local resources for these individuals with mental illness to decrease the incident of negative ideations such as suicide. And in order to meet this goal, my objectives were to decrease the rate of hospitalization related to mental illness over the course of 3 months by 5%, and then decrease the rate of homelessness amongst these people over the course of 6 months by 5%, little steps. In order to complete this goal and meet these objectives, I have come up with interventions such as increasing small local mental health clinics that'll have like a doctor and or an RN, or even an NP instead of a doctor, maybe therapists, people who can help meet the needs of these mentally ill people, whether that be medications, coping mechanisms, counseling, de-escalation techniques, etc., in order to prevent a prolonged hospital stay. So lower rates of hospitalization will then become apparent. Also, to increase resources needed to help the homeless obtain a job. And I would include in that transportation or money for transportation, shelters, maybe business professional clothing for interviews, mock interviews, whatever can prep them to not only obtain a job but hold a job. And employment helps individuals become more financially stable. And if they're employed and they're financially stable, then they're able to provide a proper living situation for themselves, which will help with the decrease in the rate of homelessness. For community resources and partnerships, I just put one of each kind of partnership or resource that was available. Emily Goodyear is a therapist in the community. The Glenmore Psychological Center is a good one, along with the Greater Cincinnati Behavioral Health Services. That one and also the mobile crisis team at UC are both tri-statewide, so it's not just for Cheviot or just for the area around UC. It's for people who live within the tri-state who can access this resource, for their benefit. And then I also have the American Psychiatric Association, and they are fighting for change for people who are mentally ill, and that is nationwide. They have a website too, I think. And to evaluate whether or not my interventions for my goal were successful, I'm going to use secondary analysis of existing data, quantitative data, which will correspond to the rates of admission at the hospital. So I will need to gather that data and look at that to see if one of my objectives was successful, and then surveying and interviewing people in regards to the homeless population, seeing if they were able to obtain a job, hold a job, if then they were able to save up enough money to provide themselves with somewhere to stay, and that's qualitative data. And that would, if everything was successful, that would be the solution for decreasing the rate of homelessness. In regards to the project itself, I think all in all, my biggest takeaway was probably the importance of mental health. Mental health was never really something that I talked about or have dealt with personally until I had a family member who was recently diagnosed with a mental health issue. And I think a lot of people just struggle in silence and they don't say anything. And when there's a negative alteration in their mental health or discovery of some kind of mental illness, it can affect someone's life drastically. I know personally the person in my family that was diagnosed, it rocked their world, and they are still learning to cope with it years later. So I feel like mental health plays a critical role in a person's overall well-being. So it's very important that we take mental illness, not just for this project, but in general, seriously. But yeah, that's my community assessment project. Thanks for listening.